So I'm gonna give a talk based a little bit on the talk I gave at FDS 5, just kind of course, with like updated view. I'm gonna do a, you know, quick review, quick overview of various goals that we had in 2024. Then we'll go into just an in-depth review of network metrics. So this is going to be the bulk of this talk that we're going to spend most of the time there. We're going to review PMF lightly. I'm going to build on what Molly just said and kind of highlight a few of the great achievements that we've had since last FDS. I'll talk a little bit about network funding, and then I'll finish with a range of things to focus on. I'll reinforce a lot of what Molly just said and give some a few other ideas. As Molly went through, FDSs are extremely valuable in helping us align on everything that's going on across the ecosystem, helping us understand what the priorities should be, what the problems and challenges are across the board, what our roadmaps should be, how we should like reorient and adjust things. And one of the critical ways that we can do all of that is by refreshing our understanding of the network using a lot of the data that we have. So this is one of the key things that we're going to do together. And again, all of this is to kind of enable you to page in all of um, the various like things that are happening across the network in kind of like a compressed way, surface it for you, help you think about it as you go into a lot more talks throughout the rest of the coming week, um, and then in all of the discussions at FDS6. So again, everybody's very familiar with Filecoin here already, of course. But again, just to reinforce, the mission of Filecoin is to create a decentralized, efficient, and robust foundation for humanity's information. We are roughly organized in kind of this broad master plan, which is, first we built the world's largest decentralized storage network. We achieved that in the first years. Like that was, a 3 to 5 year endeavor, from like the very beginning of Filecoin to shipping the network, onboarding an enormous amount of hardware, building a very large scale community, and kind of growing from there. Since then, we've been focused on the step 2 and step 3. Step 2 is to onboard and safeguard humanity's data. So this means scale the data onboarding into the network and make Filecoin very useful for lots of different kinds of storage users. And step 3 is to bring compute to the data. That means bring a whole various different ways of connecting users' data with different kinds of computational paradigms so that they can write applications and run programs and so on top of the data that they're storing in Filecoin. That, in the long term will make Filecoin as a storage platform extremely useful for folks. And again, because data has gravity, and once you kind of place data in a particular kind of network, it has all kinds of stickiness and network effects and so on. When you compute data, you generate an enormous amount of data additionally, and it sort of reinforces the strength of Filecoin. We have looked at Filecoin over the last few years, in terms of a range of different businesses and different markets that Filecoin is kind of orienting around. It's really key to remember that Filecoin is a new paradigm for how to do cloud storage, and therefore we have to look at the success of this different paradigm, in the lens of different kind of like computational platform shifts. And so there's various different ways of looking at this, but one of the key things that is kind of common across most of the technology paradigm shifts that are very successful is that these new paradigms tend to introduce significant features that the existing incumbents cannot easily provide. For Filecoin, these are things like being able to have decentralized storage across the world, being able to add verifiability and cryptographic proofs on top of the data, being able to weave smart contracts and all the financialization of data assets and so on around the network, being able to like incentivize also participants to make the network more robust and so on. And couple those kinds of new features with a very significant cost reduction. And the cost reduction is a really critical component of enabling these paradigms to take hold, because usually new feature sets don't tend to be on their own able to kind of replace an old paradigm Usually new features tend to end up in a lot of cases replicated or things like that. You also need to deliver a very significant cost reduction. And the good news here is like Filecoin has a great way of achieving that cost reduction using the block reward. And we've used this kind of Filecoin economy diagram with the internal businesses around Filecoin, exports and imports, and then kind of consumption as the use of the Filecoin token inside of the network. And you can think of the Filecoin economy itself as embedded in a much larger landscape with other economies and other markets. And we want Filecoin to be very successful in terms of providing lots of services and utility to these other markets. Kind of zooming into the economy, where we've been focusing on for the last year or so is to, first and foremost, increase paid adoption of Filecoin. So this means making the storage use of Filecoin super useful for various folks and enable those users to pay for the data that they use on Filecoin. This means also figure out all kinds of feature sets that are important to those users. For example, being able to have very fast retrieval, being able to have cryptographic proofs like PDP to be able to like have kind of in the clear verifiability of in the clear data, having payments of for clients directly weaved into the network. I'll kind of return to this later. We've also focused on lowering network costs. So this means all kinds of cost reductions for SPs, being able to like run the software and hardware much more efficiently, bringing in new funding for various network businesses so that that capital and this kind of comes into the network and helps finance a lot of these groups, so that this is not kind of like fill value leaving the ecosystem. And then we broadly want to greatly increase utilization of the network itself through applications within the network, connecting Filecoin to storage and compute L2s, and kind of driving lots of different kinds of transactions. You probably are working on maybe one or two of those kind of broad categories, but it can have, as a large group, we're working across the board. This is kind of a slide that we've used in the past for the Filecoin network goals in 2024. I kind of like did like a quick grading of these. We definitely achieved a whole bunch of things here, including great cost reductions for network-wide OpEx. We chipped away an enormous amount to getting to reliable retrievable. We now have strong measurement of retrievability performance. And we have all kinds of tools to enable that retrievability. It's still not yet connected to incentives, and that's still a hurdle. We'll see it later in the metrics. We also helped make storage simpler, faster, and more reliable. We developed a whole range of storage on-ramps. Those on-ramps are now strong businesses, and they're getting their own users and all of that kind of thing. And then there's a range of other goals that we had that we did a range of work on, but didn't quite kind of fully achieve. Things like onboarding tons of paying users into Filecoin storage in terms of large scale archives. Huge amount of work has happened there. Lots of users got added on onboarded, but this is still not yet operating at the scale that we wanted to. We wanted to also bring all kinds of other high value applications and things like deep networks and compute over data networks and so on to the network. There's been a number of applications that have been developed in and around Filecoin. But those haven't really taken off yet and haven't started generating an enormous amount of data. So we sort of like get partial credit here, where like there's an enormous amount of development that's been happening around the ecosystem, but those networks themselves haven't yet become so successful that like the data use that is coming from those networks is very significant to Filecoin. And then kind of lastly, we wanted to develop like the connectivity to very compute heavy types of applications to enable participants to do like strong computation with the data stored on Filecoin. There's kind of the infrastructure in place for people to do that, thanks to things like FEM and IPC and others. But there isn't yet the kind of connectivity and easy easy connectivity of the data stored on Filecoin to these other compute networks, such that people can compute with their data on Filecoin similar to how they would on traditional Web2 cloud systems. Think of things like Vercel or things like AWS and so on, where you can very simply connect some compute to your data. And so we need to get to a kind of a level of platform integration that is seamless like that. Cool. So now let's get to and by the way, like these are super ambitious goals, and whenever we set these, we kind of like aim really high. We never quite know where we're gonna score really well or not ahead of time. So we there were a lot of like really great results in a range of these things, and we kind of chipped away at a ton of the progress that we needed to make on a range of these things, but we're not yet, kind of we haven't achieved all of these things yet. Great. So let's now look at the network and go into, a whole range of metrics. And, a huge thank you to, Falcon Numbers, David Gasquez, and the Starboard folks, um, and also the PhilPlus Data Cap Stats and Answer Research, who now is also producing a range of graphs. I'm using all of their data here and graphs here. So huge thanks to them. So let's look at storage onboarding. This is usually kind of where I like starting things off. And this is kind of the last year. So this is like the last 365 days. So we're continuing to expire excess capacity. So the network is continuing to shrink capacity. This is kind of like on track based on what we've been expecting and forecasting for quite a while. Surprisingly, QAP is still sustaining around 23 XB bytes. Was the same thing at FDS 5, which is pretty curious. What that tells me is that it's just kind of capital cycling from CC into verified deals. And so kind of like the rough scale of Falcon Capital is the same, is around the same, because we don't have like a significant increase or decrease in QAP. And the empty capacity is just shrinking to meet the usage. So whatever the usage is, that's kind of like where the capacity scale will be. We might have a little bit more capacity, but eventually, yeah, the kind of headroom that a network like this should be kind of around 10%, not 10x or something like that. When we look at sector onboarding specifically, it's pretty stable and actually growing. So it grew up around 40% over the last year, from 2.5 pips to about 3.5 on average. And the QAP onboarding actually grew more. So it grew around 50%. So from 20 uh, PIB of QAP to 30. By the way, there's like a kind of a confusion in units that we've kind of had to deal with for many years, where we call QAP units also, petabytes and terabytes and so on, and that tends to create a lot of confusion. I think one good proposal for this FDS would be to like propose a FIP to like rename the QAP units to something else, like we decrease the confusion. Sorry, this is the updated. So when we look at the all-time capacity and QAP utilization, so here on the graph on the left, we can see the unused capacity coming down to meet the actual useful deals that are being stored. The decrease has actually slowed down quite a bit, so like it's not actually decreasing as fast as it was in 2023. But my expectation is that it'll come to meet it eventually. And that might be because useful deals kind of just start increasing and take off, or just because the unused capacity just eventually rolls off. The QAP, again, QAP is kind of hovering around 23 exabytes. It's pretty stable around there and has been for like, a year and a half. And then the network utilization is kind of hovering around 30%. So this is still kind of tapering off and kind of stabilizing, mostly because the unused capacity is slowing down its decrease, and the useful deals are not kind of growing a lot in this time frame. And so that's kind of why utilization is kind of around 30% and it's not kind of growing. So, some key takeaways here. First, the PhilPlus incentive is working to get SPs to store data. So this means most of the folks in the network are like rolling from, you know, uh, onboarding new unused capacity to instead onboarding actual verified deals. And QP is continuing to grow quite a bit through this time frame, even though the market has seen massive amounts of volatility. We were like deep bear market 2 years ago. This year has, though theoretically there should have been like a crypto bull market, just a ton of the volatility in macro is kind of inhibiting that. And despite all of those challenges, QAP continues to grow. When we look at QAP storage onboarding, and we look at the all-time view, so not just like the last year, but that we look at the all-time view, there were two periods that got like actually very high. So one was in 2021, where there was like this huge spike when China was kind of like growing at full capacity. This kind of like before the kind of order in China to kind of get a lot of crypto out. And then the second time was in kind of mid 2023. We actually got very close to the ATH as well. And the interesting thing here is actually though the app here is not much bigger than where we are now. It's about like 2x from where we are today. So we actually only have to onboard. We only have to increase the onboarding rate by 2x to meet that scale that was happening kind of 2021 and in mid 23 when Falcon is actually performing dramatically better. So like if you look at the circulating supply for those exact same time periods, in those periods was when we were having a very large amount of locking and the network got closer to deflationary. And so we really just need to get to, somewhere between 60 to 100 uh, PB of QAP per day. So it's again, 2 to 3x of where we currently are to like completely shift to where, how the network economy is working. If we look at data onboarding, this has also been pretty stable. It's kind of onboarding on the order of 3 petabytes a day. There's some dips during the holiday. There's a bunch of volatility because different groups plan their onboarding in different time periods. All the onboarding is full plus data. And it is growing some amount in 2025. So if you look at the 2025 trajectory, from even after the holidays dip from January to now, it's sort of like steadily growing. Just a very small percentage. And if we look at the all-time view, there's we're onboarding less than we used to, but that's mostly because there's a much stronger Fill Plus verification now. So there was a lot of like kind of bogus data being onboarded in kind of like mid 23 that was not legit. And so as Fill Plus got a lot stronger on all of this, a lot of that data stopped coming onto the network. And worth noting that snapping is happening, but very little. It's like currently negligible in terms of the utilization. Um, when we look at data onboarding and we can use the information in the PhilPlus registry to kind of categorize by both region and by industry, you can see the different regions on the left. Two interesting takeaways. One is China data onboarding is growing. So it was kind of like it decreased a lot in 23, in kind of like 24, but now it's starting to pick up again. So it'd be interesting to see and dig into that and kind of get more certainty over, what are the uses here, and really make sure that this is like very well connected to strong use cases and usage and so on. Just because a lot of the kind of abuse that we've seen historically has come from specific folks there. Of course, abuse all over the world, but just kind of like concentrated there. And then separately, like if there's like a lot of like really cool legitimate use cases, it would be great to see ways of highlighting those and maybe enable crypto to have like a much better light again in China. Usually, policy, as we've seen over the last 5, even 10 years, and crypto tends to have a highly oscillatory nature in terms of how countries handle policy. So we could actually see a huge reversal in China in terms of like the China policy on crypto, similar to what we've just seen in the US. And a lot of that could be led by very strong positive use cases. So things like Filecoin, things like Glow, and so on could actually help catalyze that. The second really big takeaway here is that US data onboarding is growing a lot as well. So there was like a very significant period in mid 23. There was a big dip in early 24, and kind of like late 24, and now the US is growing quite a bit. It's not really clear how much the EU adds up to from this graph. It'd be great to kind of like group those into continental regions to be able to see Europe. My guess is that it's actually comparable to the US, or maybe like 2/3 of that. It's just kind of currently broken out by separate countries. If we look at the industry designation in the PhilPlus registry, a lot of the data, especially the recent growing data, is in life sciences and healthcare, which makes sense in terms of that being a particular use case that has vast amounts of data, where folks want to be able to store huge amounts of data with strong verifiability, strong requirements around being able to make sure the data is safe in the long term, but without a lot of the retrievability requirements that might be present in other kinds of applications. And so that seems like a strong fit There's a few others, like general IT type things. It'd be interesting to maybe improve the categorization here to get more specific about like what concretely might be like the sub use cases, to see like if we can clean out some like interesting use cases growing. When we look at Fill Plus stats, so here's a compliance by SPs. So first off and foremost, it's awesome to now have these graphs. So an enormous amount of work has gone into generating all of the measurement and processes and so on to actually be able to drive the compliance of various folks and check the compliance such that we can are able to generate these kinds of graphs. So awesome to be able to have these. Um, it's good to see the compliance actually increasing. So when you look at SP compliance across the board, it's increasing. The main thing that SPs have trouble with is retrievability. If you remove retrievability from sort of like the three checks, then compliance looks dramatically better. So most of the data is still only partially compliant, primarily because of the retrievability. Now, if you look at retrievability, like that does not look great. I mean, one good news here is that it is improving. So like the amount of green is actually increasing over time and is sort of is getting better. There's kind of some kind of mess up in the last couple of weeks. This seems to be a regression, either in the compliance process itself, like in the measurement, or in the data collection about the measurement. And so there's some problem somewhere because the last 2 weeks have all been super red, and that to me just says that there's a bug somewhere. I don't think the SPs have dramatically changed their approach to compliance. Um, Either way, though, we've had the measurement out there for a while. It's clear that the measurement alone and kind of um, surfacing it to on-ramps and users and so on, it just isn't enough to drive compliance. We really need to weave retrievability into incentives. So we built all the infrastructure to be able to do that over the last year and a half. Um, and now that we have it, we should be able to now start weaving it into the actual Fill Plus incentive structure so that the Fill Plus rewards factor in the retrievability score of participants to be able to properly make sure that folks are actually honoring the terms of the Fill Plus deals. And then one other kind of interesting highlight here is that most of the errors come from IPNI reporting. We'll see that in the next graph, but uh, most SPs are not actually reporting to IPNI, so the retrievability just fails off the bat. So it could be that a large fraction of these might actually be retrievable. It's just we can't, our checking systems can't currently check it. So that seems like low-hanging fruit to potentially drive a lot of compliance fairly quickly if that turns out to be the case. Now, if we turn to look at the allocators themselves, like first off, we can now inspect the allocator tree, which is super cool. It's great to be able to visualize it and see kind of like what it sort of like the structure is. Um, Note that almost all allocators today are still manual. So we need to really drive building automated and market-based allocators. This might be a good thing to do during this FDS. It might also be a really good thing for hackathons and for grants and so on to kind of help drive the creation of more automated or market-based allocators. When we look at the stats of allocators, the allocations tend to be going to many different clients, so it's fairly diverse according to the kind of measurement tools from the Fill Plus program. And all of these most of the allocators tend to pass compliance audits. So most of the allocators tend to be doing the job specified from the allocator program. And you can see kind of the breakdown by different countries. Most allocations are in China and Singapore, and Europe and North America are growing quite a bit. Now looking at data retrieval, so this is really cool to now have Spark and the Spark dashboards, being able to see the overall retrieval success rate, and then kind of see like where it's kind of going wrong. So on the left-hand side, you can see the retrieval success rate of the whole network, um, which is kind of like around roughly 20%, which is slow but persistent improvement. Like we started around 12% and now it's much better than that. Again, there's some regression in the latest data. You can see that in like the spikes. And then if you kind of remove if you only look at like the non-zero miners, there's like specific definition there in Spark. Then that jumps to over 50, around 50%, which is great. The last few months have not been as good as February and so on. And again, I think this is just about incentives right now. Participants don't get anything or lose anything if they do this. In fact, it costs them some amount of money to respond to retrieval requests. And so we really have to make sure that like the actual incentive structure is strongly promoting retrievability. Now, we can see in the error distribution here that most of the errors, this is like the third graph, most of the errors are coming from having no IPNI advertisements. So again, this seems like low-hanging fruit to fix. And pretty neat to see that like the median time to first byte is actually 900 milliseconds. So that's actually pretty good. So normally in a sort network, you don't want to look at the median. You want to look at like like kind of like the 99th percentile or 95th percentile and so on. And there I would guess like this actually looks a lot worse. Um, but it's actually quite good to be, having the median around 900 milliseconds is not bad because this isn't even kind of like a CDN style tier. So it's good to see like kind of retrievability at this scale. We need to drive improvement to get this to around 300 milliseconds, and that's kind of where the sweet spot should be for this kind of basic storage and retrieval from basic SPs, not CDN tier. And that's only kind of a reduction of like 3x. Now, of course, like getting to the 99th percentile at this, that'll be a lot harder work. But I think getting the median to 300 milliseconds would already feel a lot better for a ton of applications. So, some big takeaways here, like Spark measurements are greatly improving your retrieval. So it's awesome to see this over the last year. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit to kind of drive improvement. And it's time to weave retrieval into the Phil Plus incentives to kind of drive compliance. So let's now look at the economy. Here, I think a lot of this is going to be kind of not news to folks and fairly similar. If we look at circulating supply, circulating fill is still climbing a lot year over year, but they should greatly decrease after 2026. The delta today is kind of in the 200K to 400K fill per day entering circulating supply, and that's either because of capacity unlocking or mined fill or vesting. Vesting ends in 2026, and so that should decrease by around 180K if I did read the graphs correctly. And so that at that point puts it like very close to the landscape of like just slight adjustments into onboarding can flip the network to be fully deflationary, which is like a very, very significant milestone. If we look at log fill, again, we reached the high watermark in we're very like yeah, we reached kind of the high watermark of like log fill in early 2024, and it's been decreasing since. Most likely because of the volatility in the market. I think 2024 and then now 2025 again 2024 was kind of like in a bear market situation, and then 2025 has been quite volatile since. So that's kind of like the strongest explanation for this. But again, more onboarding and should lead to a lot more locking and burn. And burn fill is only growing slowly these days. Like it was a huge increase in 2021. It's kind of like before hyperdrive. They should start rising again with HIP 100. It'll take some time to ramp up, but this should connect the economic loop of to actually drive a protocol fee. And the total gas usage tends to be pretty high. There was again a dip early in Q1, but it's fairly close to saturated. And David helped me graph the kind of like yearly inflation rate. This is still very high. It's around 24%, but it's decreasing very quickly. And it's hard to project this, but it could be something like 4% in 2027. So this could actually like, completely fall off a cliff after 26. So we'll see kind of like where we are. And just note that in 21 and 22, like the inflation rate was massive. When we look at core dev activity, we currently don't have like the graphs just looking at our repos. These graphs look at the broader extended ecosystem, including users and including various open source dependencies. And so that broader ecosystem is kind of maintained by around 3,000 to 5,000 contributors. So that means that like the Filecoin community and the users of Filecoin and the folks building kind of like very close dependencies to Filecoin is a fairly large set of developers. And so this is kind of like an interesting target for leveraging in all kinds of developer programs and DAO style tooling to kind of like help route PGF funding and all that kind of thing. It'd be really, really awesome to be able to have graphs with like burn down charts against network roadmaps and things like that. Just one quick note on AI. This may be the last year with very low amounts of AI contribution. Like, of course, everybody's already using AI in various ways, but still, usually the contributions are primarily a human's contributions with some amount of AI assistance. Somewhere between 25 and 27, AI contributions should start becoming autonomous and eventually will start dominating in open source. Uh, Already today in large organizations and large companies, huge percentage of the software is now written by entirely automated AI systems. So, one important takeaway here would be to make Filecoin really great for AI systems, such that AI systems prefer to use Filecoin in general, and like just LLMs tend to opt to use Filecoin. And then AI systems will kind of like want to improve Filecoin. And so we should start thinking about how to create a very like significant environment to enable these kinds of systems to help build the network. Again, this is not like, it's not huge right now, but it'll be huge very quickly. I think kind of by 27, it'll be fairly significant. We currently don't have a way to view a lot of the developer activity. Um, it would be great to be able to see kind of like how many devs are using Filecoin, how many devs use Filecoin in hackathons, how many startups are building Filecoin, all those kind of thing. We don't yet have this data, but it would be great to have it. Now, shifting gears a little bit to looking at kind of the economic loops. So I used this diagram previously in FDS5, looking at different kind of economic loops in different networks. When you think about Bitcoin, Bitcoin has a very straightforward economic loop based on the decentralized store of value use case. When you look at Ethereum, Ethereum has a decentralized store of value use case as well, but it's just, that particular use case really only has room for maybe really only like kind of like one cryptocurrency. Um, it's very difficult to kind of displace Bitcoin from that today. So that economic loop for Ethereum is quite weak relative to Bitcoin. Now, instead, ETH is focused more on things like application spending gas and ETH locked in various applications and DeFi and L2s and whatnot. And just note that like third economic loop is the big kind of looping question in the big ETH drama with the L1 and L2s and the kind of like cannibalization of like block space and all that kind of stuff. Um, and that, a kind of like weakness in the economic loop here is like can be existential for a network. And so it's really, really important to make sure that like these kinds of economic loops are very tightly coupled and are working really well, and so on. Note that in our case, in Filecoin's case with L1s and L2s, in our world, we have like a dramatically more complementary structure because kind of L2s and applications in Filecoin are developing specific markets as opposed to kind of like just competing for the same resource, right? Like the L1, L2 cannibalization problem is just coming from the fact that like the Ethereum L2s are just offering the same exact thing that the Ethereum L1 is. They're not kind of like offering differentiated products. Um, but yeah, don't need to dive too much into. So I would like not really like a lot of the kind of like L1, L2 questions from Ethereum like don't really apply in Filecoin. Then, but then when we kind of like look at the economic loops of Filecoin, again, Filecoin also has the centralized store of value structure, but very difficult to kind of beat Bitcoin in that. We also can leverage application spending gas, but this is where competing with Ethereum and Solana and like all of the other networks, it's just not that's kind of like a losing proposition in the same way that Ethereum trying to compete with Bitcoin and decentralized store of value is a losing proposition. So really where Filecoin needs to focus is in users locking fill, which reduces supply, which is kind of like, a loop based on the kind of like utilization of various systems in the network. And then separately, storage clients buying storage and fill. So when you think of FIP 100 kind of helps both of these loops a bit. So it's strictly helps in the users locking fill, which reduces supply, because that's kind of concretely what's happening. But it is connected to storage onboarding. So if lots of storage clients are buying storage in various different ways, that's causing this kind of locking. So there's kind of like a weak link to kind of like that fourth loop. When we looked at this in FTS5, I made a very strong kind of push on trying to fix this arrow because currently storage clients cannot, buy storage and fill. And so since then, a huge major improvement. So first, because we passed FIP 100, this creates a strong economic loop between storage onboarding and kind of the consumption of fill. It's not yet enabling the storage clients buying storage and fill, but it helps at least capture some fraction of whatever kind of storage client purchasing is happening. Um, Now it'll cost them a amount of burn, so it'll bring at least a fraction of that value flow into the network. The second major thing that happened is USDFC was released, and this is yeah, Molly already kind of went into it. This was proposed at prior FTSs. The secured finance folks did an enormous amount of work to bring this to the community. It's out there. Folks can use it now, and this enables denominating contracts and storage in USD, but keeping the value inside of the fill economy. It's like this is a major thing that can help fully close this arrow. But it's not sufficient to have USDFC. We have to use it. So this economic loop is not going to be fully connected until we actually have on-ramps and clients and so on actually using some kind of mechanism that either uses fill directly or uses a stablecoin like USDFC. So kind of like this loop is still not working. It's a lot closer today. Like a huge amount of the infrastructure was put in place to enable this. But now we have to kind of get deals on chain and get deals using USDFC. So if folks here are working on concrete on ramps and so on, considering using USDFC instead of USDC or something else to be able to kind of keep the value inside the Filecoin economy. And then separately, think about how to bring visibility into your concrete storage deals so we can are able to kind of connect those metrics into the network in some way. Cool. So that's the bulk. That was like the longest part of this talk. It was kind of like the bulk of what I wanted to go through with you. I'll do like a quick review of PMF and then kind of um, uh, go into network funding and a few things to focus on. So as a reminder, product market fit is like this condition between a product and a potential market of users where the product has the kind of like necessary and sufficient set of features and distribution channels to the users so that the market of users that cares about using this product can find it easily and can start using it and kind of like get going. Filecoin has had product market fit, but not for storage. Filecoin had product market fit for mining. I don't know if folks like remember kind of like 2019 and 2020 and 2021 were like super intense years in terms of like the level of product market fit in terms of a user base wanting to kind of like extract features from the product and kind of like driving attention and so on. And so we kind of like have achieved product market fit in the past in different categories, but we do not yet have product market fit for actual client storage. We have a lot of data in the network, and we have like shades of product market fit, but we don't yet have strong PMF. And just remember that PMF in Filecoin doesn't mean there's a specific set of users that are using Filecoin directly in terms of like specific end users. Because storage is just such a broad category of products, storage itself isn't a single product. Storage breaks down into a range of submarkets, many more than four when you look at AWS or Google or and other cloud systems. There are usually somewhere between 8 to 15 different types of storage products. And you can imagine that this kind of storage will continue evolving over time. And so PMF for Filecoin really means identifying what those submarkets are and doing well in a range of them. At FTS5, we kind of like selected these four, Web2 large scale storage, Web2 object storage, Web3 object storage, and Web3 chain storage. And those are kind of like the four that we're focusing on in various ways. There are, of course, many more storage markets that we could go after, but these are the ones that seem strongest to us for a bunch of reasons. And then recall that the strategy that we have to achieve that PMF is not to try and build the entire kitchen sink into the L1 and try to like do everything and be like try to like please every single customer in the same storage flow because that's just kind of intractable. Similar to every major cloud system out there, we kind of like divide and conquer this by creating a range of different products, and enabling each of those products to have its own like very strong business and its own kind of like path to success. And this is where kind of like the L2 or application component, kind of like in the strategy fits in, where we're going after these specific markets, uh, as different on-ramps targeting those specific markets. So if you're kind of like driving an on-ramp, um, like hyper focus on one market. In fact, if any on-ramp is kind of like straddling two markets, I kind of like, you know, I strongly recommend you go and read like the YC literature on building great products for folks. And they strongly, strongly, strongly recommend hyper focusing on ideally one market. And then over time, once you kind of like conquer that market, you can expand from there. But if you're straddling two right now, like you may have a really hard time trying to deal with like all of the different constraints and requirements from different folks. Like we've already had to deal with that at the Filecoin level over the last 5 years. You probably don't want to recruit that level of pain in addition. And we've done a range of exercises in PMF in the past. I think one good thing that we could do this FTS is kind of refresh some of this documentation. It'd be great to have kind of like a current view into what markets we actually fit well now. There's been a lot of things shipped over the last few months. There might be kind of like certain use cases and markets that have opened up for us. Um, a kind of like brief note on network funding. So not kind of recapping from the past, um, we can think of funding in two categories. One is kind of like private funding, and one is public funding. So private funding, think of like different kinds of private capital. So this could be VC funds or private equity funds or like individual angel investors or this kind of funding. There's a range of accelerators and VCs investing around the ecosystem. Um, there's a ton of individual investors in our extended networks. The things that are working here are we have strong startups in our ecosystem tend to get funded. There's a strong builder funnel with strong programs helping folks go from like early ideas into building startups, and there's all kinds of support structures for them. We have many startups in the network that have grown and gone through this entire builder funnel. Many Filecoin ecosystem startups have developed over the last few years, and we have a very large scale amount of capital in the broader ecosystem in VC, in PE style bets, and in Phil leasing. There's a very, very large scale amount of money in Phil leasing. So what do we need next? So first off, we need more investors of all these categories. We need better ways to find opportunities. So we might want to bring back things like Phil VC again. And we want to create structures for very large scale amounts of capital to come into the ecosystem. Um, I think because the kind of like because I think crypto is going to be a lot more accepted around the world in the next few years, all kinds of structures have opened up that are now possible. And I think that the kind of connection to AI is going to enable kind of like the first fully AI-driven um, venture funds or PE firms and so on. And it'd be pretty amazing if like those start developing around the Filecoin economy. So it'd be fantastic if we can get to a point where we have kind of like the new forms of capital forming around the network to help like finance the construction of Filecoin. And when we think about public goods funding, think of the existing PGF mechanisms like um, the grants that we've done in the past, retro PGF and now pro PGF. So things that are working, a whole range of important projects get funded. We can now have a community allocating funding both retroactively through Phil retro PGF and now proactively to using Phil pro PGF. We have lots of easy ways for organizations to fund various things like sponsorships and so on. And when we think about like what we need next, we need to route just more funding to these programs. And we need these programs to be both higher impact and lower cost. So think of like ways of leveraging AI systems over time, or ways of like just studying kind of like the systems by which we make a bunch of the decisions and thinking about how to like shave out kind of like wasted time. And one other important constraint here is that we need to find easy ways for organizations to fund these kind of PGF programs. Ideally, easy ways for on-chain networks like applications and L2s to fund the programs directly. So, kind of like the map looks like the left-hand side today, where there's a range of kind of like now on-chain sort of programs like PhilRetroPGF and PhilProPGF. And there's kind of like donations coming to them primarily from FF and PLFIF. But a few applications and L2s are contributing. And in the future, we want kind of like a structure where if you think like many years out into the future, the network becomes self-sustaining when the revenue flow of the network is able to finance its own production of public goods. So think of like weaving Filecoin Network value itself into these programs, and think of ways of the L2s and applications that greatly benefit from Filecoin should be contributing to those as well. So now, just concluding quickly on things to focus on. I just reinforced Molly's slides. I think she did a phenomenal job describing a range of proposed focuses. I won't read through all of these, but like yeah, certainly recommend like focusing on PMF, getting to data onboarding and sales, improving the tech stack, and just broadly kind of anything related to enabling the individual on-ramps to be successful in their markets. Like that should be kind of P0. And there's a whole range of things that we should be doing across the board in FTS6 to help with that. So there's all kinds of problems in the client path. There's problems in the underlying tech stack. There's problems in kind of how the economy itself accrues value. And there's broad ways of kind of enabling the community to support the build out of all of these things. And so all of these different categories could have great contributions during FTS6. Maybe I'll highlight a couple other things that have been on my mind recently. One is in order to kind of like drive strong PMF in each market, we kind of like need to arrive at a structure where like the folks going after those markets have a kind of very fast path to success in those environments. And so we should be careful about anything that like creates any drag for them, and we should be thinking about how to like improve the underlying structures and systems on their behalf to enable them to be successful. And we also need some kind of like visibility in the system to be able to understand which ones are working and how they're working and so on, to be able to route resources and support to them over time. So this might be figuring out a range of metrics on how we can measure the on-ramps themselves to be able to like understand how what's working, what's not working, and how to support. The second thing, again, I just can't emphasize enough to just scale data onboarding and usage. There's all kinds of programs and structures now on this, but like just kind of this is like what Ben Horowitz calls just a hell of a lot of lead bullets, where there's not kind of like magic solution anywhere. It's just a lot of like grinding to make the programs actually work. So this is just a large focus for the network. And then kind of the third thing I kind of wanted to highlight is there's a range of L1 improvements that are more foundational and fundamental that are ending up supporting the applications in L2s. So there's all the FWS architecture shifts and that enabling things like PDP and a range of other proofs. And there's a lot of like improvement that can come from that. One other important thing that can come into play here is that we could create ways of measuring the SLAs that are, and we've talked about in the past about how to like measure SLAs across the network and connect it to incentives. We could also do that at the L2 and application level. There was a large discussion at FDS5 where John Schwartz and others like were pushing really hard on like, hey, what is like kind of like the incentive layer that we can create around L2s? And since then, is really the model that has stuck out to a lot of us is the BitTensor subnet model. That model is actually quite powerful and is very flexible. And when you kind of like relax the constraints of how do you define subnet, you can actually look at many other networks as potential subnets. So here the word subnet doesn't necessarily like is perhaps like the wrong name. It's just whatever BitTensor used. It's just the idea is that you should be able to measure some other group, understand how it's benefiting you, and then drive some amount of rewards to that group in kind of this reciprocal structure. And if you do that well, then you can drive an enormous amount of kind of like positive sum alignment. And so I think that model is worth exploring, and a set of us are gonna kind of like think about how to create structures during this FDS6.